Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In the small town of Jennings, Louisiana, 8 women vanished between 2005 and 2009. Their bodies were discovered in canals and backroads, each death more mysterious than the last. But what makes this case truly chilling isn't just the murders themselves, it's the web of corruption, police involvement, and cover-ups that followed. These women weren't just victims of a killer, they were casualties of a system designed to silence them. Tonight, we dive into one of Louisiana's most disturbing unsolved cases, the story of the Jennings 8. Let's begin. Between 2005 and 2009, the small town of Jennings, Louisiana, became the epicenter of a disturbing series of murders that would eventually become known as the Jeff Davis 8 or the Jennings 8. Located in Jefferson Davis Parish, this community of roughly 10,000 people would find itself grappling with a darkness that seemed to seep into every corner of their once quiet town. The story begins with the discovery of the first victim, Loretta Lynn Chason Lewis. On May 20, 2005, fishermen made a grim discovery in a canal off Highway 1126, just outside Jennings. The body of 28-year-old Loretta was found floating in the water. She had last been seen 3 days earlier, getting into a car with an unknown person near Belden Street, an area known for drug activity. Loretta wasn't just another statistic. She was a mother, a daughter, and despite her struggles with addiction, she was loved by many in the community. The autopsy revealed she had drowned, but the circumstances surrounding her death were suspicious enough for investigators to treat it as a homicide. What they didn't know at the time was that this was just the beginning. Less than 4 months later, on September 11, 2005, the body of 30-year-old Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson was discovered in a rural area along South Thompson Street. Like Loretta, Ernestine was found in water, this time in a tributary of the Grand Marais drainage canal. She had been strangled, and her body showed signs of a violent struggle. The similarities between the two cases were impossible to ignore. Both women were known to frequent the same areas in South Jennings. Both had struggled with drug addiction. Both had been involved in sex work to support their habits, and both had been found in bodies of water within the parish. The investigation revealed a disturbing web of connections. Many of the women in this small community knew each other, crossed paths regularly, and shared information about dangerous clients or situations. They also shared another common thread. Many had served as confidential informants for local law enforcement, particularly in drug-related cases. The third victim was discovered on March 18, 2007. Kristen Gary Lopez, just 21 years old, was found in a canal off Highway 99 near Morse, Louisiana. Like the others, she had moved in the same circles as the previous victims. Her body was also found in water, making it difficult for investigators to gather forensic evidence. The pattern was becoming clearer, but the identity of the killer remained elusive. The investigation was complicated by several factors that would later become points of serious controversy. The Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office, led by Sheriff Ricky Edwards, faced accusations of mishandling evidence and showing a lack of urgency in solving these cases. One of the most troubling aspects of the investigation was the apparent connection between the victims and local law enforcement. Multiple witnesses would later come forward claiming that some officers were involved in the local drug trade and that several of the victims had information about police corruption. The fourth victim was Whitney Dubois, found on May 12, 2007. The 26-year-old's body was discovered on a rural road near Highway 102, just outside Jennings. Unlike the previous victims, her body wasn't found in water, but investigators believed this was the work of the same killer or killers. Whitney had been seen alive just days before, and like the others, She had connections to the local drug trade and had reportedly worked as an informant. As fear gripped the community, rumors began to circulate. Some believed the murders were the work of a serial killer. Others whispered about a police cover-up. The truth, as it would turn out, might be even more complex than either of these theories. The victims shared numerous commonalities beyond their lifestyle circumstances. They all knew each other, either directly or through mutual acquaintances. Many had attended the same parties or gathered at the same houses. Several had been scheduled to testify in drug cases, and perhaps most disturbingly, many had expressed fear for their lives in the days or weeks before their deaths. Local journalist Ethan Brown would later spend years investigating these cases, uncovering disturbing connections between law enforcement, the drug trade, and the victims. His investigation would reveal that several of the women had contacted family members or friends before their deaths, expressing concern about specific police officers and their involvement in illegal activities. The investigation was further complicated by the small-town nature of Jennings. Everyone knew everyone else, and the lines between law enforcement, criminals, and victims often blurred. Many of the victims' families reported that their loved ones had tried to clean up their lives, to get away from drugs and the dangerous situations they found themselves in, but something, or someone, kept pulling them back. As 2007 drew to a close, the community hoped they had seen the last of these murders. But the killer or killers weren't finished. The new year would bring more victims, more questions, and more disturbing revelations about the dark underbelly of this small Louisiana town. The investigation would take a series of bizarre turns, including allegations of evidence tampering, witnesses dying under suspicious circumstances, and claims of a massive cover-up involving multiple agencies. The task force assembled to investigate these murders would face its own controversies, and the families of the victims would grow increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress in solving these crimes. What made these cases particularly haunting was not just the number of victims, but the web of connections that seemed to link every aspect of the investigation. From the victims themselves to the potential suspects, from the law enforcement officers to the local drug dealers, everyone seemed to be connected in some way, creating a complex puzzle that investigators struggled to piece together. As 2008 dawned, the residents of Jennings hoped the murders had ceased. However, on May 20, 2008, exactly 3 years after the discovery of Loretta Lewis, the body of Laconia Muggy Brown was found dumped on Rucker Road. Muggy, who was 23 years old, had been brutally murdered, her body showing signs of significant trauma. Like the others before her, she had connections to the local drug trade and was known to have worked as an informant for law enforcement. What made Muggy's death particularly significant was that she had reportedly been trying to provide information about the previous murders. According to multiple sources, including her family members, she had told friends she knew who was responsible for killing the other women. She had even attempted to contact the FBI in the days before her death, but before she could reveal what she knew, she became victim number 5. The 6th victim was discovered on September 11, 2008. Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, 24 years old, was found in a dry canal near Grand Marais Road. Crystal had been close friends with several of the previous victims, particularly Muggy Brown. Like the others, she had struggled with addiction and had moved in the same social circles as the other victims. Her family later revealed that she had expressed fear for her life in the weeks leading up to her death. Just 2 months later, on November 12, 2008, the body of Brittany Gary was found off Highway 102. At just 17 years old, Brittany was the youngest victim. She had been last seen at a local gas station, and security footage showed her getting into a car with an unknown person. Brittany had been close to Kristen Gary Lopez, and despite their shared surname, they weren't related, but had been good friends. The task force investigating these murders, which now included members from the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office, the Jennings Police Department, and the Louisiana State Police, seemed to be making little progress. This multi-agency task force, operating out of a building known locally as the Command Center, was plagued by internal conflicts and accusations of incompetence. One of the most troubling aspects of the investigation was the handling of evidence. Multiple witnesses would later report that evidence from the crime scenes had been mishandled or had gone missing. In some cases, crucial pieces of evidence were reportedly destroyed or lost. The task force's processing of the crime scenes was later criticized by external law enforcement experts as being substandard. Adding to the complexity of the investigation was the death of several potential witnesses under suspicious circumstances. One key witness, a man named David Deshotel, was found dead in his home in 2008. He had allegedly been preparing to provide information about the murders to investigators. His death was officially ruled a suicide, but many in the community questioned this finding. The eighth and final known victim was Nicole Jean Guillory, found on August 19, 2009. Her body was discovered miles away from Jennings, along Interstate 10 in Acadia Parish. At 26 years old, Nicole had been trying to distance herself from the dangerous lifestyle that had claimed so many of her friends. She had reportedly told family members that she knew she would be next, and that cops were involved in the deaths of the other women. The investigation took a dramatic turn when several witnesses came forward with allegations about a location known as the Boudreaux Inn, a seedy motel that had allegedly served as a hub for drug activity and prostitution. Multiple sources claimed that local law enforcement officers would frequent the establishment, and that several of the victims had been seen there with police officers in the days before their deaths. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence came from a witness named Frankie Richard, a local man who had known several of the victims. Richard claimed that there was a group of people, including law enforcement officers, who were involved in both the drug trade and the deaths of the women. However, Richard's credibility was questioned due to his own criminal history and drug use. The investigation was further complicated by the apparent suicide of Danny Barry, a detective who had worked on the task force. Barry had been accused by several witnesses of having inappropriate relationships with some of the victims and of being involved in the local drug trade. His death added another layer of mystery to an already complex case. As the years passed, various theories emerged about who was responsible for the deaths of the Jennings 8. Some believed it was the work of a serial killer, possibly someone in law enforcement who had the knowledge to cover their tracks. Others suggested it was the result of a conspiracy involving multiple people, including police officers, who were protecting their involvement in the drug trade. The FBI eventually became involved in the investigation, but even their resources and expertise failed to bring closure to the cases. The investigation was hampered by years of mishandled evidence, destroyed documentation, and the deaths of key witnesses. In 2011, investigative journalist Ethan Brown began digging deeper into the cases, conducting extensive interviews with witnesses, family members, and law enforcement officials. His investigation would uncover disturbing patterns of corruption within local law enforcement and raise serious questions about the official handling of the cases. Brown's investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of relationships between law enforcement and the criminal underworld of Jennings. Through extensive interviews and document analysis, he uncovered that several officers had been accused of running protection rackets for local drug dealers, and some had even been romantically involved with some of the victims. One of the most significant findings was related to the Boudreaux Inn incident. Multiple witnesses described seeing officers engaging in illegal activities at the motel, including drug use and sexual encounters with some of the women who would later turn up dead. Despite these allegations, the task force seemed reluctant to pursue these leads aggressively. The investigation also revealed that several of the victims had been in contact with a man named Warren Gary, a former police officer who had connections to both law enforcement and the drug trade. Gary had been questioned multiple times, but was never officially named as a suspect. He denied any involvement in the deaths, though several witnesses placed him in the company of some of the victims shortly before their disappearances. The role of confidential informants became a crucial aspect of understanding these cases. Many of the victims had worked as informants for different law enforcement agencies, often playing one agency against another. This dangerous game may have contributed to their deaths, as some witnesses suggested that certain officers were worried about what information these women might reveal about police corruption. In 2012, a witness named Melissa Lewis came forward with startling allegations. She claimed to have been present at a gathering where several of the victims were discussing what they knew about police involvement in the local drug trade. According to Lewis, some of the women had photographic evidence of officers engaging in illegal activities. Within months of this gathering, 3 of the women were dead. The task force's handling of evidence came under intense scrutiny when it was revealed that crucial DNA samples from several crime scenes had been improperly stored, making them unusable for testing. Additionally, clothing from some of the victims had been lost or destroyed before proper analysis could be conducted. These failures in evidence handling made it virtually impossible to build a solid case against any potential suspects. Another disturbing aspect that emerged was the connection to a local strip club called the Millennium, where several of the victims had worked at various times. Witnesses reported seeing both victims and law enforcement officers frequenting the establishment, and some suggested it served as a hub for arranging drug deals and prostitution. Despite these allegations, the task force seemed to show little interest in thoroughly investigating these connections. The investigation took another dark turn when it was revealed that several potential witnesses had died under suspicious circumstances. Besides David Deshotel and Detective Danny Barry, at least 3 other individuals who claimed to have information about the murders died before they could provide formal statements. While some deaths were ruled suicides or drug overdoses, many in the community believed they were strategically silenced. Family members of the victims began conducting their own investigations, frustrated by the lack of progress from official channels. Barbara Gugliori, Nicole's mother, spent years collecting information and speaking to witnesses. She compiled a detailed dossier of evidence, including names of potential suspects and witnesses, which she turned over to the FBI. However, this information seemed to disappear into the bureaucratic void. The case attracted national attention in 2016 when Ethan Brown published his book, Murder in the Bayou, which detailed his years-long investigation into the Jennings 8. The book raised serious questions about the role of law enforcement in both the murders and their investigation. Brown's work suggested that rather than a single serial killer, the deaths might have been the result of a complex conspiracy involving multiple perpetrators, including members of law enforcement working to protect their interests in the local drug trade. The book's publication led to renewed interest in the cases, but also brought threats against those who spoke out. Several witnesses interviewed for the book reported receiving anonymous threats, and some refused to speak publicly about what they knew, fearing for their safety. In 2019, Showtime released a documentary series based on Brown's book, bringing even more attention to the cases. The series featured interviews with family members, witnesses, and law enforcement officials, painting a disturbing picture of corruption and cover-ups in Jefferson Davis Parish. The increased scrutiny led to some movement in the investigation. The Louisiana State Police assigned new investigators to review the cases, and the FBI expanded its involvement. However, The years of mishandled evidence and lost witnesses made building a prosecutable case extremely difficult. Perhaps most troubling was the revelation that similar patterns of mysterious deaths continued in Jennings even after the 8th victim. While not officially connected to the Jennings 8 cases, several other women with similar backgrounds died under suspicious circumstances in the years following Nicole Guillory's death. These cases shared many of the same characteristics: connections to the drug trade, relationships with law enforcement, and a lack of thorough investigation. The impact of these murders extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The cases exposed deep-seated issues within Jefferson Davis Parish, revealing a complex system of corruption that had apparently been operating for decades. Former District Attorney Michael Cassidy, who served during the time of the murders, later admitted that the parish had long struggled with systemic problems in law enforcement. One of the most significant developments came when former Deputy Paula Guillory, no relation to victim Nicole Guillory, came forward with allegations about evidence tampering within the sheriff's office. She described witnessing fellow officers destroying evidence and falsifying reports, particularly in cases involving certain protected individuals within the community. Her testimony provided crucial context for understanding how these murders could have gone unsolved for so long. The investigation into the task force itself revealed troubling patterns. Despite having access to substantial resources, including a $1 million reward fund established by the state, the multi-agency team seemed to make little genuine progress. Former task force members later reported that certain leads were deliberately ignored, particularly those pointing toward law enforcement involvement. In 2020, new evidence emerged regarding victim Loretta Lewis's last known movements. Security footage from a previously unexamined source showed her in the company of 2 men, one of whom witnesses identified as a former law enforcement officer. However, by the time this lead was pursued, the officer in question had died, taking any potential knowledge of the crimes to his grave. The role of the Boudreaux Inn continued to surface in witness statements. Former employee Marie Arsenault came forward with detailed accounts of law enforcement officers engaging in illegal activities at the motel. She described specific instances of officers meeting with some of the victims who would later turn up dead, though she too reported receiving threats after making these statements public. A crucial piece of the puzzle emerged through examination of phone records from the victims. In the days before their deaths, several of the women had made calls to the same phone number, which was later traced to a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash. While the buyer's identity was never confirmed, witness statements suggested the phone belonged to someone within local law enforcement. The investigation into Warren Gary's connections yielded more questions than answers. Multiple witnesses placed him with victim Brittany Gary, no relation, on the night of her disappearance, but physical evidence that might have confirmed these accounts had been lost or destroyed. Gary maintained his innocence until his death in 2016, though he admitted to knowing several of the victims through his work as an officer. The discovery of a journal belonging to Crystal Benoit Zeno proved particularly revealing. Found among her possessions after her death, the journal detailed specific instances of police corruption she had witnessed, including names and dates. However, when investigators went to retrieve the journal from evidence storage in 2018, it had vanished, adding to the long list of mysteriously disappearing evidence. The pattern of witness intimidation continued well into recent years. In 2021, a former drug dealer named Thomas Guillory, again no relation to Nicole, attempted to come forward with information about police involvement in the local drug trade during the period of the murders. Before he could make a formal statement, his house was burned down in what investigators ruled a suspicious fire. What makes the Jennings 8 cases particularly haunting is not just the murders themselves, but the way they expose the dark underbelly of a small American town. The victims were not just killed, they were failed by the very system meant to protect them. Their deaths revealed a complex web of corruption that touched every level of local authority, from street-level officers to high-ranking officials. The cases remain officially unsolved, though investigations continue. The FBI maintains an open file, and new leads occasionally surface, though many in law enforcement privately admit that too much time has passed and too much evidence has been lost to ever bring the perpetrators to justice. The legacy of the Jennings 8 serves as a stark reminder of how corruption can infect an entire community and how the most vulnerable members of society often pay the highest price. Their stories continue to resonate, not just as unsolved murders, but as a testament to the devastating consequences of systemic corruption and the importance of maintaining integrity in law enforcement. The aftermath of the Jennings 8 cases continues to reverberate through Jefferson Davis Parish. In recent years, new technological advances have allowed investigators to re-examine some of the surviving evidence, though these efforts have been hampered by the poor preservation of materials from the original investigation. In 2022, forensic experts attempted to analyze trace evidence found on Nicole Guillory's clothing using advanced DNA testing methods. While the results were inconclusive due to degradation, they did manage to isolate a partial male DNA profile. Unfortunately, this profile was too incomplete to run through CODIS, the FBI's DNA database, highlighting once again how the mishandling of evidence in the early stages of the investigation continues to obstruct justice. The families of the victims have never stopped seeking answers. Loretta Lewis's daughter, now an adult, has become an advocate for police reform and has spoken at several law enforcement conferences about the importance of proper evidence handling and the dangers of corruption within small-town police departments. One of the most significant developments came through the work of retired Louisiana State Police investigator Jerry Mitchell, who continued to investigate the cases independently after his retirement. Mitchell's review of the original case files revealed that several witness statements describing police involvement had been deliberately misfiled or categorized as unrelated incidents, effectively burying potentially crucial leads. The Boudreaux Inn, which played such a central role in the case, was finally demolished in 2021. During the demolition, workers discovered a hidden room containing various items that appeared to be from the period of the murders, including several cameras and videotapes. However, before investigators could properly examine these materials, a suspicious fire broke out at the storage facility where they were being held, destroying everything. The drug trade that formed the backdrop to these murders has evolved but not disappeared from Jennings. Local authorities report that while the open drug markets of the early 2000s have largely been eliminated, the trade has simply moved underground, with new players replacing the old ones but maintaining many of the same corrupt connections. Former task force member Sarah Johnson broke her silence in 2023, revealing that during the original investigation, certain officers had actively interfered with efforts to pursue leads involving law enforcement personnel. According to Johnson, several search warrants for properties connected to police officers were deliberately delayed, giving the subjects time to clean up any potential evidence. The impact on the community's trust in law enforcement has been lasting. A 2023 survey of Jefferson Davis Parish residents showed that 78% believed local law enforcement was involved in the murders, while 89% believed there had been a cover-up. These statistics reflect a deep-seated distrust that continues to affect police-community relations. Perhaps most troubling is the evidence that similar patterns of behavior continue. Since 2009, at least 6 other women with backgrounds similar to the Jennings 8 victims have died under suspicious circumstances in neighboring parishes. While these deaths haven't been officially linked to the Jennings cases, they share many of the same characteristics: connections to the drug trade, history of serving as informants, and inadequate investigation of their deaths. The Jennings 8 cases serve as a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of unchecked corruption and the importance of maintaining professional standards in law enforcement. They remind us that the victims of such crimes are not just statistics, but real people whose lives were cut short by a system that failed them at every level. As we look back on these cases, it's clear that the truth about what happened to these 8 women may never be fully known. Too much time has passed, too much evidence has been lost or destroyed, and too many potential witnesses have died or disappeared. What remains is a legacy of broken trust, unanswered questions, and a community forever changed by the darkness that was allowed to flourish in its midst. The Jennings 8 cases continue to influence law enforcement practices across Louisiana. Their story has become a case study in police academies, highlighting the importance of proper evidence handling, the dangers of corruption, and the devastating impact when law enforcement fails to protect its most vulnerable citizens.